Love, light, and blessings, shamanic Arawak priestess here. So, I was currently this weekend watching some of my videos on my subscription list, and because I took a social media break. And so I wasn't not only making videos for weeks, I was also not watching. I took a complete personal social media break. Some of it because of the relocation situation, and a lot of it was also because of mental health. Just needing to disconnect and kind of work on myself, take care of my mental health and self-love, taking care of myself. Well, this headband bothers me. Like, okay, taking care of myself so that I can be the best spiritual person, so that I can be the best root worker, the best psychic, the best mediumship sessions, like give you the best of my services. And I felt like I was just so drained. I just needed to disconnect. And even from watching any type of videos, even though I love watching YouTube, I just needed to disengage. When I was in the process of packing up my spiritual things, I knew that I can only have a limited amount of decks out, and that when I moved, it was going to take me time to unpack my boxes and my things. So these will be decks that I will have for a while the only access to, because 90% of my collection will be packed up. So it kind of brought me to the topic of this video. And I wasn't going to do it because I was like, I don't know. I got started doing other videos and things like that, like the check-in video and the Loa versus the Orisha video. And that video, there's a mix mash of different topics and kind of a check-in and favorites. So it got lost. And then I watched Mary Faroon's video about missing tarot and, having that relationship with that, with those decks, those few decks that really speak to you. And it's a very deep video. I'm going to link it to this video. This is kind of a VR. Kind of a VR, kind of not a VR, because I was planning to do this video, but I feel like watching her video, it kind of validated more that I really want to make this video, listening to her perspective on that. And it's a really good video. I highly recommend it. So when I was packing up my stuff, and I was packing up my Oracle deck collection and my tarot collection, two things happened. I found an old box that I have completely forgotten about. It was like that one box I never unpacked in the 4 years I've been living here, okay? It wasn't labeled or anything. Like, I kept saying I was going to get to it, but for some reason I didn't. That's horrible. So the other day I opened it because, like, what's in here? Like, I just thought it was like a file cabinet or something. Maybe there's like some old papers in there. I don't know. It was kind of like, because when I moved 4 years ago, it was under different condition. I kind of just threw everything together. It's what I don't want to do now. I found a whole box of doing virtual oracle decks when I first started doing professional readings. And I had always wondered what happened to those decks, if I had given them away or whatever. And I realized that I have no connection to them. I didn't even miss them. So I'm going to be rehoming those decks and things like that. But so I realized that I do have decks in my collection that, if they got lost like that, I didn't miss them really in the last 4 years. Only recently, I was like, hey, I had that deck. Whatever happened to that deck, kind of thing. And most of them are out of print now. So, but it just made me really realize that when I was putting the decks away, I said, when I have more time in my new place, I'm gonna put some of them in the maybe side, and then some of them rehome. And then there's some of them that I will never use, that I'm going to keep, because like the Angel Tarot, was a deck that I worked with exclusively for like a year, along with the Psychic Tarot, and I did my professional readings with the Psychic Tarot, and things like that. And the Angel Tarot was a very personal deck for me. um, even though I don't feel drawn to use it anymore. One, it's a beat up copy, so who's gonna buy that? I don't want to throw it away. And I have attachments to it. There are decks in my collection because when I do buy tarot decks and oracle decks, the ones that I've kept, I've used them. A lot of them, there's a very small group of ones that I've never really used. They're brand new and I can rehome them. But the majority, 75 to 80% of them are chipped, are old, are worn, because I did use them in the past. Maybe I'm not drawn to use them anymore, but I'm still drawn to them. I still, not drawn to them, I still have memories. I still have a connection with them. So I feel like those are the decks that I'm going to continue to keep in my putting them to sleep box, because that happened to me with the Psychic Oracle, and I ended up giving it away, and then I ended up repurchasing it. And I know for a fact that the decks that I'm not using anymore, that are chipped and worn and old and beat up, I'm going to be drawn to them in the future. I'm going to get rid of it, and then I'm going to miss them, and things like that. So that's what I'm going to do. So basically, I'm not really going to too much downsize my collection, because again, most of my collection consists of decks that I used in the past consistently. And things like that. So, for example, Crystal Visions was a deck that I used a lot in the past, that I knew very intimately, and I did professional readings with. Robin Woods is another one. The Universal Weight is another deck. So those decks I used very consistently and a lot in the past. Okay, so maybe someday I'll be drawn to use them again. However, when I looked at my reflection of this year, these are the 9 decks, 3 Oracle and 6 Tarot decks, that I have the most intimate relationship with. Some of them I've been working with the longest. That I know the cards, I know the symbolism. When I'm reading, even before I put them down on my reading table, I already know the answers. These decks speak to me the loudest, and I have an individual relationship with each one of these. And that's what I consider my working deck. My working decks are the ones I have the most intimate relationships, the ones that I could do the best readings with, the ones that the spirits speak to me the loudest. And what I've noticed is the decks that I do want to rehome are the ones that I work personally with, because I noticed that some of them lately have been, and I think that's why I stopped doing the daily draws. I was making that an excuse to buy other decks by doing weekly draws and daily draws. And I was forcing myself to work with a lot of decks that I would look at the guidebooks, because I didn't have a deep connection with them. They didn't speak to me the loudest. They didn't speak to me intimately. I was falling into this thing of, I must work with modern decks and things like that. And, these are the decks that I'm watching on YouTube, and they're popular, and, and things like that. And that's not me. I love clones. I love traditional decks. I love vintage decks. I love older decks. I love less popular decks sometimes that nobody really talks about, and things like that. And I've just been learning through this process of packing things away, what really works for me, and me not wanting to just buy things because everybody else is doing it. I do have an unboxing that I'm going to be doing of a deck that I never even heard of. It was a suggestion on my Amazon. I watched the walkthrough of it, and I was like, yes, this is what I've been looking for. It has a traditional setting, it's inclusive, and it's based on fairy tales, and I will be doing a walkthrough of that, and I got the book for it too. I bought that deck because I plan to actually use it for as a working deck in the future. I want to work with it one-on-one. I want to really study this deck, study this system, really get to know this deck on an intimate level, and then later on use it as a deck for clients, because I just feel really drawn to work with the deck, and I feel a connection to it already. But I like to work with decks for a little while before I use them on clients. So when I was packing my stuff, these are the decks that I've been working with the longest, that I have the most intimate relationship. So I'm going to start with Oracle. So one of the first decks that I ever got, it was the Angel Tarot, It was the Psychic Oracle and the Romance Angels by Doreen Virtue, okay? And the Daily Guidance. So those four were my first decks. This deck, the Psychic Oracle, okay, technically was my first like tarot deck, even though it's more of like an oracle deck. And when I worked on the hotlines, this is the deck that I used. It was either playing cards, this one, or this and playing cards kind of situation. Maybe the Romance Angels one, you know, things like that. Which I'm not drawn to that deck anymore. I still have a copy of it. I'm gonna be rehoming it because I tried using it the other day. I was like, ugh. So this deck is timeless. I know this deck. I read with it. It speaks to me loudly and beautifully. This deck helped me to learn when I first started working with chakras, and it just made me comfortable. Like the messages just spilled out. And when I got rid of it, because I got lost in this whole buying thing, I lost sight of the connection that I always had with this deck. And I began to miss it, is why I purchased it a second time. So I realized that the Psychic Tarot is a forever deck for me. I'm not an oracle person. So I'm not going to force myself to buy oracle decks when I'm not really drawn to it. I like oracle decks that are like more Lenormand-y, more tarot related kind of energy versus just affirmations and everything's positive and things like that. A lot of them are beautiful, but the messages to me don't feel deep enough and things like that. This is the Psychic Tarot of the Heart. And this is another one. This is like the second one that I got later on in my oracle, and I use it to read with clients. Not as much as the Psychic Tarot of the Heart, but I do use this one as well, and it does speak to me when I'm called to use this deck. It speaks to me. I don't have any particular readings I use these decks for. I can do a general with any of these oracle decks, but sometimes Spirit tells me like use this deck today, so I'll use it today. So this is on my rotation, and I do have a very deep connection to this one as well. I know this deck, you know, this deck speaks to me. May not be my favorite art style, but it's a deck that really speaks to me. And the third oracle deck that I do a lot of readings with is the Energy Oracle deck. This is another deck that really speaks to me. It's balanced. It has its negative and positive cards. It has a very tarot type energy to it, and I use it a lot. Like, these are the only oracle decks that I need. All the other oracle decks that I have, like, I'm not an oracle person. Like, I'm going to be rehoming the majority of my oracle decks, with a few exceptions, because I'm not drawn to them. I'm not going to use them. A lot of my oracle decks that I've gotten are brand new. Like, I shuffled them 3 times and forced myself to do daily draws with them just to kind of validate why I have them, and things like that. And so I don't want to do that. But there are some oracle decks that I don't use anymore, but I did heavily use in the past, or some that I want to further, like, actually have the time to work with, and possibly put them into my rotation in the future. So those will be staying, but the ones that I know I'm never going to read with, those are going to go, because they're not doing anything for me. You know, they're not doing anything for me, and there's no point of keeping them if they don't do anything for me. Real early on in my tarot practice, so I got the Crystal Visions and the Robin Wood. This was one of my earlier purchases as well. And this one, because I always had issues with the portrayal of the Devil card, kind of got me to kind of accept the Devil card. And this deck, I had a dream about it to get it, and I looked at walkthroughs because I never heard of this deck. I wasn't someone who You know, my mom used playing cards. I use playing cards. So, you know, I don't come from a family of tarot readers like that. They do cartomancy and things like that. So tarot was something that I learned on my own, and things like that. And this deck speaks to me to this day. It's one of my OGs that to this day I still have a very intimate relationship with. I love working with this tarot, mostly during the fall. I notice I'm drawn to it, so I'll work with it a lot of times in the fall season. They look like children, the court cards, to me, so it just reminds me of like going back to school and that happy time, because I love autumn and things like that. So that's when I'm usually drawn to this. I love that it's color pencils. I love the light colors of it. I love the characters. Like, I know all the people on these cards. These are my little buddies. I read with this, and I don't have to put much thought and effort because everything just flows smoothly. And I do all types of readings with this deck, and I love the size of this deck. And you know, it's had usage. Like, I love this tarot deck. I have more than one copy of it because my original copy got so beat up I had to buy a new copy of it because literally it was in pieces and stuff. I read professionally on a full-time basis, 6 days a week, 6 to 8 hours a day. So my decks get pretty used and worn and things like that. So there are times that my working decks, I do have to buy a second copy to replace it and things like that. But the Hanson Roberts is one of my go-tos. Like, I could not see myself packing this away. Like, I always have to have it. And the times that I've gone long periods of time without reading with it, I miss it. I've tried to give it away. I've tried to pack it up, and I always end up opening up the box and taking it back. Like, I have to have this in my arsenal. Like, I have a deep connection with this one. I have a deep Morgan Greer was a love and hate relationship. This is also a newer copy, and as you can see, I use it a lot. It's already chipped. My original copy was really bad, and this was one of the first decks that I got. I've always been able to read really well with this deck. Okay, so, and I always find myself reading with this one in like autumn. It just looks very Halloween autumn type colors. The problem is I kept trying to use other tarot decks, so this got lost in the shuffle. So I was trying to force myself to read with decks that I wasn't really connecting with, so this kind of got shoved to the side. But then I realized, like, no, I get really amazing client readings with this, and this one reads really well for me, for myself personally. So why? Like, why am I trying to read with decks I don't really like? Like, this deck, I know it. It gives me really great readings. It makes me happy. I love the funkiness and the 70s vibe to it. I love everything about this deck. It's a beautiful deck. It gives me great readings. I love the backs, little stars. And so I tend to be attracted to decks seasonally, like my working decks. And so this, I only work with it mostly in the autumn, but I've been working with it for years, so I know about it. This one, I work with the Wheel of the Year during my wintry months, New Year's, things like that. Sometimes even like spring, maybe. And this isn't a popular deck. A lot of people don't like this deck. This deck, I didn't like it when I first got it. My daughter was like, you should get it. It looks pretty, the box. I got it because I like the box. I ended up giving my original copy to my daughter. And then one day I had a dream about this deck. And I kept dreaming about it. And I was like, okay, I don't like this deck. So I started working with it. Right off the box, when I actually gave it a chance, spoke to me. And this is not a popular deck. A lot of people don't like it. I don't really hear a lot of people on YouTube talking about it. But this, I did a VR. This is my soul deck. This is the deck that has given me some of the most like personal readings, client readings that I've cried. Like, my guides really connect to this artwork, to this color palette, to this deck. I know this deck back and forth. This is one of my longest decks that has been a working deck for me, that I have read personally for myself. I lost a really good friend of mine some years back when I first started my channel, and this was the deck that I used for that reading, to get me through a mourning process. So I have a very personal connection with it. And even when this deck goes to sleep, because there's times with my working decks that I feel drawn to work with other ones, it isn't a deck that I'm going to get rid of. This is a forever deck as well. To me, like, these are my forever. I want to always be with these decks. If I can only have 9 decks, if I can only have a smaller collection, these are the decks that I want, because I have that relationship with them. I do so many readings that they're my buddies 6 days a week for a certain amount of times a year. This is a deck that I had to get another copy of because my original copy was so beat up. I love this deck. Like, the Wheel of the Year is a soul deck to me. Like, I remember doing a walkthrough of it on my channel and people actually buying it because of the way that I described all 78 cards. Like, it speaks my language. Like, I can see the messages through this deck. It just speaks to me on a very high level, and I have a connection with it. And even if nobody else likes the deck, I love it. Like, it's a soul deck. When I eventually got into Rider-Waite, the Universal Rider-Waite was the deck that I used and had the strongest connection to. And then Radiant, I never liked it. And then I did the Centennial and I used that one a lot. And then the original tarot I got obsessed with. So I've been always with Rider-Waite. I've used different versions of it. And currently this one is the one I left out, the plaid backs. And I never liked the original plaid backs I had because they had like a different font. But once they put Pamela Coleman Smith's font on this, I was excited. And I love this really bright coloration of this deck. I love the, like, it isn't fancy. Like, I know the Rider-Waite Smith because I've been working with it so much in its various forms. This is the deck I've studied the most. I also don't use a lot of tarot books to study. I don't own a lot of tarot books to study because I literally bought a tarot deck, read the little white book, started doing readings with them, and connected with them psychically and gave really accurate readings when I did that whole year of doing free readings and kind of honing in on my skills before I went professional. And within that year, I also like bought one tarot book that I had for years. Recently bought a second one, and those are the only 2 books that I study tarot. And I study tarot a lot, but when she was talking about in her video like how she misses just having those 3 books, I have those 2 books that they're worn and they're old. Like, my first book, it has yellow pages already. It, like, I know where to look at and reference, and I have reread it so many times. I think that I've lost count of how many times I've read that book cover to cover because I love it so much. And I think there's something to be said that you don't need to buy a lot of books to learn tarot. You could buy one good, one, 2, you know. One I bought because I wanted to study. So the first book that I bought was more about the meanings, but then I wanted to deeply study the symbology of Rider-Waite Smith. So I bought that one for that reason. But I don't want to buy any more books. I'm good with the 2 books that I have. And I have a really good knowledge of tarot. Like, I'm really connected. And being that I only work with these 6 decks throughout my practice, really, like, these are my 6 most used work decks or whatever, it has made me a much better reader because I have that intimate relationship with my decks that I can give you your answers quicker. I have, like, it's like any type of relationship. When you use a deck, you imbue your energy in it, you put your energy into it, and having that intimate relationship and that connection and working with those and not forcing yourself to work with decks just because they're popular or because that's what you think that's what you're supposed to do or whatever, unless that makes you happy. it just makes me give the best readings. Like, there's nothing better than when you're doing a reading and you're working with that deck that you connect with. And I love the exchange that I have when I do professional readings. I get the chills when I start hearing buzzing in my ears, when I hear spirits whispering things, because I'm very clairaudient, when I start to see visions, when I see words in my mind, like when you have that connection with your decks, that it goes beyond the book meanings, and you start touching into something from the other realm, from spirit, from your ancestors, from the spirit guides and things like that. Like, it's such an amazing feeling. And the client's like, yes, that's so, how did you know this? And because you're going beyond like the meanings in the book, because you have that intimate relationship. Nothing can replace that. Like, these are the decks that make me so happy, that give me that reader's brain, that helps me to connect with something outside of myself, that give me the most deepest spiritual connections. Mrs. Cleo's deck, okay, I don't know the actual technical name, but this literally, you can go on Amazon, and I think it's like the Mrs. Cleo Power Pack Tarot or whatever, something like that. This is the beautiful backs. This deck I got because it was cheap, and I had seen it on someone's channel, and I was just buying. There was an impulse buy, but oh my god, like, as soon as I started reading with this deck literally is like my mediumship deck. This is the deck that I get the best, other than Rider-Waite-Smith, and other than Rider-Waite-Smith, I get like spirits and ancestors, spirit guides, spirit court readings, everything spiritual, energetic readings. Like, a lot of my special readings, this is the deck. I feel such an energy with this deck. Like, no, it's not about the art style. It's not even the best. Ooh, it's not even the best cardstock, whatever. Like, but this deck speaks to me. I'm not saying it's going to speak to other people, but even with myself, like, this deck is no bullshit. Like, it's very Lenormandy kind of energy too. It's like, this is what it is, and that's it. And I've read with this deck before, and sometimes like names come through, and I can't explain it. Like, is this unexplainable connection that I have with this deck? And it's one of my newer ones, but this is a working deck. This deck and I have a very intimate relationship with. Like, I love it. Like, I love it. It's a working deck. This is not a deck I see like, ooh, anybody making a thing out of it, but I have a connection with it. And I tend to connect with things that, I don't know, they're not always the most popular things in the world, but they speak to me. Tarot of the Illuminati, I got this one, and I didn't like it, with the gilding and all of that. Ended up not wanting that version of it. I thought I got rid of it, and I didn't. I found it when I was packing. Because I had put it away, and I didn't know, so I ended up repurchasing it. It doesn't have gilding anymore, and the cardstock changed. It's thinner. The other one was thicker and cardboardy, and I didn't like it because of shuffling. So I would try to do professional readings when I was still on the psychic hotline, and I was just like, oh no. And then I thought the deck was too busy, and these are the backs. But what I realized is, no, in the summer, or more of that, like, springtime, summertime, warmer times, I'm drawn to this deck. And I don't know, like, I started using it recently when I rebought it, and it became a work deck. Like, it gave me the most amazing readings. And I think it has to do with mostly because it's not even my art style. But it's very traditional, and I notice I like traditional decks, or decks that are, so Mrs. Cleo is in like Egypt, ancient times. Wheel of the Year is ancient pagan. Like, I notice I like those old, ancient, traditional, like, time periods. And this one takes place like, you know, that Renaissance, that type of Rider-Waite kind of thing. What I love about this deck too is the diversity in it. So it fits all my boxes. It's diverse. It takes place in an ancient old time in monarchies. So the queens are actually queens. this deck speaks to me on a very deep and spiritual level, and it is a deck I love doing client readings with. It is a work deck. It is a deck that I know intimately. It is a deck that I can see the pictures before. With all these decks that I'm mentioning, I could see the pictures. I have deeply just sometimes played with them in my hand and looked at the deeper symbology and things like that. Like, I love this deck. And I was so happy because I'm like, oh, I finally have a diverse deck in my collection that I have a deep connection with, because I know there's a lot of versions of tarot clones that are made, but they're modern, and I feel like sometimes they become so modern they lose like the old symbology. And I feel like that's what I connect with. I connect with decks that have a lot of Rider-Waite-Smith symbology on them, or are loosely based. Like, they're not so modern where it detracts from that. Like, so, you know, me seeing laptops on a tarot deck, for me personally, I don't connect with that. Me seeing like the night of whatever, you know, riding a motorcycle, or being on a skateboard or whatever, or being in a coffee shop drinking coffee or something like that, or sitting on a laptop, like that just doesn't do anything for me. I like the ancient feel of tarot. Like, what else am I gonna say? Like, I like the ancient feel of these more traditional decks. And I think that has a lot to do with the spirits that I work with. I work with a lot of spirits that are from monarchies that lived thousands or hundreds of years ago, and things like that. So I work with a lot of traditional spirits, and I think when decks have a certain type of artwork that seems to be more traditional, it just speaks to them, right? And it speaks to me because I'm their channel. So these are the decks that, like, these are my soul decks. And I think that I'm just gonna do that. Like, I think that I'm just going to work with what works for me, and I'm gonna stop trying to be like, no, I need to force myself to like modern decks because that's what I'm supposed to do. And I do stand by the whole thing that I said in my last video, that I wish I could see more of this. You know, decks that have diversity, that are more traditionally based on Rider-Waite-Smith. So if someone's like, I can't work with this deck, and they won't make it, like, they can't adapt it the way I have, that they'll have options with decks that maybe that's their art style, that has more of a traditional setting, that hasn't lost the traditional symbology, that they could read with. Because they do have some, but they're like, sometimes they're abstract or whatever. Not everyone can read with that. So maybe, like, you know, more of a similar artwork to more like that, but being more traditional, so that they can, you know, see themselves in the cards, but not have to compromise by, oh, I can only use this because this is like traditional, but I don't find anything that's that traditional. I want more options like this, you know, with more diversity, you know, and things like that. So, you know, I would love to see deck creators create these types of decks. A lot of the inclusive decks are also indie, and a lot of people can't afford that. And then the ones that are mass produced, you know, like I said, some of them are really modern, and I've talked to people and they're like, I want to buy these decks, but like to read professionally with them, I can't. Like, they're too modern. And then in my mind, that's not what the Page of Wands looks like. So then I can't get the same messages. And when somebody's paying you for a reading, like, you need to use what works for you. Like, they're paying you money. So I just go with what works for me. And that just gives me the best readings and the best connection. So, all right. So I think that's it for this video. Much love, much light, much blessings. Again, this is not against any collectors, because there are people that collect tarots, and I love watching those channels. I just have a certain amount of decks that I really like. These are the only decks I really work with, and then occasionally I'll work with the other decks for like personal work, but I don't do personal work that much. Reading for myself has become more of a burden, and things like that. So I am going to really look at my collection when I move into my place, like when I get settled. But I think a lot of them I will keep, the ones that I used heavily in the past. Like the Hoodoo Tarot is going to be a forever deck because I actually do like working with that one. And eventually I do plan to possibly put that into my working rotation. Maybe not, but definitely will remain a personal work deck for me. I love it. You know, decks like that I love. So, but I put it away because I'm like, I'm not using it right now, and things like that. So, and I'm not really doing personal readings right now. And if I do, I use one of these decks to do it. Again, because again, limited spacing. So anyways, the end of that chapter. Much love, much light, much blessings. Thank you so much for watching this video, and until the next video. Bye guys.